So today we talk about the Verve, or just Verve as they were initially known before the American jazz label Verve Records threatened to sue them for taking Verve as their name. This is the debut album, A Storm in Heaven, a shoegaze classic made in Cornwall, in the depths of the southwest England, near Foy. This beautiful, wonderful album was created off the coast in a small creek called the Sawmills studio. John Leckie was the producer, the famous John Leckie, who worked on Beatles solo records as a tape op. Then got one of his first chances as a mixer and producer was with Pink Floyd Medal. He then went on to record Roy Harper, Beatbop Deluxe, XTC, Magazine, Public Image Limited, and then at the dawn of the 90s, the Stone Roses debut album, where Fool's Gold, the single, and its B-side were recorded at the Sawmills. And then Verve, A Storm in Heaven, and then later on Radiohead, The Bends, and Muse, Shoegaze, Crew the Shaker K, and Cast All Change also. So, John Leckie and John Cornfield are on board. Let's see how Verve made a shoegaze classic in Cornwall. Here I am at the famous, legendary Cornish Sawmill Studios. This is some of the artists that I've recorded and mixed here. You've got the Verve, the Storm in Heaven, the Shoegaze Classic. All I got from the engineer, John Cornfield, who was assisting John Leckie on those sessions in December through to February 1993.
Storm in Heaven, is there anything you can tell me about this one?
Wow, what do you want to know?
That was with John Leckie, wasn't it, as producer?
It was, yeah. It was one of the earlier ones I did with John Leckie. I think we did the not XTC, but they call themselves, Sonic Sunspot album, which is basically XTC, but not. Oh man, my memory. What was the band called?
Sorry for putting so much pressure on you.
Yeah, my memory's not what it used to be. Yeah. It'll come back to me in a minute.
But yeah, pretty incredible working with John Leckie. I mean, what a great career. Starting off at Abbey Road, and then Pink Floyd Medal. That was the first one he produced and mixed, I think. And then he went on to
mixed it, but he was certainly around Abbey Road. I mean, he went into Abbey Road as T-Boy, basically. And
I remember listening to an interview with him. I think it was him and Andrew Sheps, I think.
Oh yeah,
talking about his career. That was a really good interview.
Yeah, because he was working with John Lennon quite a bit as well, wasn't he? And he told me some
tape operator apparently.
Yeah, but he told me a couple of little mishaps they had with tape, but probably best not go any further, really. But yeah, Verve, bloody hell, that was an interesting one. Richard Ashcroft just made all the lyrics up off the top of his head, every single tape, and it was always different. So trying to compile a lead vocal was basically impossible because none of it made sense. Not that it really made sense anyway, but it made sense in his head. The arrangements were never nailed down because they changed. The length of the sections would change every time they did a take. I don't think anybody actually knew where it was going. It was a challenging album because there was couple of songs that John decided to put it to a click because he felt it needed to be, but there was like this tom groove going on, and so we mapped it. We did a click map on it. Even back then, we were doing click maps, and sort of ramping tempos in between sections. But every time they played it, they play those sections in a different place. So all of a sudden, the tempo's creeping up in the middle of the verse or halfway through the chorus, and John would just go, "Oh, no, that's not the same." Yes, it is. No, it's not. It's not. You've played that. That verse is now 8 bars. It was 12 bars before. I said, "Yeah, well, that depends on what Richard sings, doesn't it?" So it's fucking up and everything. And I remember him getting the bass player's fingers were bleeding because he was just getting him to do take after take after take, and his fingers were literally bleeding. And John said, "We haven't got the take yet. Carry on."
I got a blister on my finger.
Oh man,
helter skelter kind of stuff.
Yeah, they're a lovely bunch though. And the songs were, there was one where we used an outtake of one song backwards to create another song. So we turned the tape over upside down and played the drums backwards.
That's a classic John Leckie technique, isn't it?
Oh yeah, so
they stop on the Stone Roses.
Exactly, yeah. So you just got things going. So they basically built a song around upside down, back to front drums, which was quite an interesting thing to do. Was it on that one that he did? Oh no, we had tape loops hanging around the studio, but that was on the XTC one. God, that's really annoying me now. I've got Kitchens of Stinction shoved in my brain now, and I can't think where they were. It was their kind of their sort of piss take on psychedelia 60s songs. Come on, you must know this.
I don't know. What's the track listing here?
The album was.
Gonna have to cheat.
The album was called. No, this was the XTC thing, not that one. But yeah, that was. I
think it was
because
sorry,
Sonic Sunspot it was called. But anyway, it'll come back to me.
It was on like one of the Sound on Sound magazines I read, actually. One of the recent editions of it.
Yeah. But yeah, it was all done on tape loops running. Oh yeah.
It might have been in here.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I don't know. It's quite far away. I think I got some other copies. I think it's in another issue. I think. But yeah, carry on.
Yeah. And yeah, so I mean, all sorts of techniques like that going on. A bit of creek reverb and all that sort of stuff, which is always good fun. Sticking mics outside the studio and putting a pair of speakers out there, and recording it back again with all the ambient, which is just annoying, man. Dukes of Stratosphere.
Yeah, that's them.
Yeah.
I think it was in here. I think it's in here.
It's quite a big cult album. That one, you should look that one up as well. I think you'd probably love that.
Probably.
Yeah. But yeah, so Verve, what else went on in that session? Yeah, Nick. He was quiet, Nick. Yeah, guitar player. He'd sit on the where we had the drums. He'd sit up there with a couple of guitar amps and just piles and piles and piles and piles of guitar pedals sitting in amongst, sitting cross-legged in an absolute tangle of fucking cables, coming up with all these amazing sounds and atmospheres. And never really said much. He was quite sharp, Nick. But I remember one time we were talking about holographic projections and stuff like that, because it was starting to become a thing even then. And I remember Nick suddenly looking really excited and, wow, he says, "You mean I could sit at home and do the fucking gigs? Wouldn't even have to leave my house?" And they were like, "Hey, fucking hell, when's that going to happen then?"
Yeah, foreshadowing these days. Yeah, foreshadowing lockdown and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, all the streams that happened during lockdown. He
Yeah.
was on
But
about
this
it
is
back
like,
then.
yeah, holographic projections. Even then, mad, isn't it?
ABBA Voyage thing that they did.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Same. Well, they've got it a bit more down happening now. But wasn't it Feel Good Inc? You know, and that lot. They did that once. They did 3 or 4 shows simultaneously around the States, all by holographic projections, all going on exactly the same time. Kind of mad shit, but of course ABBA are doing it now, so that's made it uncool. So
Yeah, that's it.
but yeah, I think we mixed that Verve album there as well.
Yeah, wasn't it the EPs as well? Because when I visited, I think you've got that Gravity Grave EP. It was on the wall thing at the Sawmills. Like
Yeah,
the big clean wall thing of all the album collage.
I got a vague memory it was supposed to have been done in 6 weeks and ended up taking 12. You know, we kept extending the session because we weren't quite ready. I just don't think they'd completely written the whole album. I think it was a case of a lot of it was written during the actual session, so which just can be quite interesting.
Yeah, but yeah, like you were saying, incredible guitarist and Nick McCabe.
Yeah,
I heard that he would play everything different as well. He wouldn't do the same
yeah.
thing twice.
No, well, the whole band were like that, so everything was that way. So it was amazing. Anything got stuck to an arrangement, which it didn't. Largely because of the lyrical thing, because until he'd finished what he was saying on that take, nobody would move on to the chorus or the bridge or whatever. They just kept playing around it. So,
maybe they were vibing off the lyrics, sort of trying to convey Richard's message in by the sonics and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it was definitely an interesting record to make, that one.
Brilliant, John. Yeah, nice to hear about that. Yeah, very, very good. Thank you.
In Verve, A Storm in Heaven, deluxe box set, it contains a book where there are interviews with all members of Verve and John Leckie and Miles Leonard, the A&R for their label Hut. Now I'm going to start the story at the point where they are going into the Sawmills to record A Storm in Heaven. So Miles Leonard, the A&R for Hut Recordings, states, when it came to making an album, we had to up the ante, so we got John Leckie in. We'd established Verve with the EPs, and John totally got them. And what we were trying to do, all the reference points. In December 1992, we went down to Sawmills in Foy, Cornwall, for a couple of weeks. John had works with the Roses and various bands down there. He knew the studio. His experience and understanding of what makes a great song was definitely a big influence on Verve. But John was very aware of not rubbing away the element that was them, which was that they were quite loose and groove-based. We did want John to make things more concise and focused, but without losing that psychedelic spirit that they had. It was a fine line. It wasn't as fully developed as it should have been. But working with John enabled them to make the best album they could make at that point in their career. Pete Salisbury, the drummer, states, by the time we came to do A Storm in Heaven, we were evolving. Everything started to get a bit slower. I was into the drums on Dr. John's Gris Gris album, and Michael Shreve's playing on David Crosby's If I Could Only Remember My Name. And then there was the Roses, though I don't think we reached that level of dynamics. I also loved Jimmy Chamberlain's playing for the Smashing Pumpkins, and I loved Zigaboo Modeliste from the Meters. I wasn't playing to be the lead, I was just trying to make the song sound as good as possible. That was always my philosophy. John Leckie states, we did a couple of weeks before Christmas and then went back in again early morning and late nights. They were quite a nocturnal band, but we'd been up all by 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. and in the studio before lunch. Everyone was keen.
That's one of the things about being in a residential studio like Sawmills. The time's your own. You look out to be on the estuary from the mixing desk. It's not a very big place, so you're always tripping over each other, but the vibe is really good there. There are no cars, so once the tide goes out, you're stuck. The only way to get anywhere, to the pub mainly, is on this little boat or a walk through the woods. There's a bit of a desert island vibe going on, and bands love that. They didn't get much sleep. They smoked a lot of dope, not a lot of drinking, and absolutely nothing else. Just a bag of grass and some beers, really. No heavy stuff, no acid. That's the kind of records I do. I was probably the instigator of all of that. It was Richard doing all the talking. Cy was always really buzzy, but all the energy, the push, was Richard. There was chemistry between them all, but Richard drove the band. Sawmills is an incredible place, and the sessions were really harmonious. They were a band that felt they had something to prove. Nick was a perfectionist and always felt that everything could be better. They were four guys who wanted to make an amazing album. They wanted to stand out. They were smoking a lot of weed during those sessions, but they were driven. John Leckie knew the extent of their ambition, and he had all the best reference points for that space rock and psychedelia they were trying to do. He got it. He's an old hippie. He engineered Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Verve were almost the meeting points between the Roses and Floyd. They weren't just a Roses copycat band. They had the grooves and the swagger, but they had different reference points. Simon Jones, the bassist, states, "It was an incredibly exciting time. With our advance, we'd bought a transit van, so we travelled down to Sawmills in that. We were all still living in Wigan or just outside. We were buzzing. Our dreams were coming true. Making a classic record was our only agenda, and John Leckie producing it was a dream scenario for us. We knew his history. He engineered the Plastic Ono band. He'd worked with Pink Floyd on Metal. It wasn't just a Stone Roses connection, although we loved them. Having John was fantastic. He was a visionary and amazing to work with. He'd never settle for second best, and he always had productive ideas. He'd be playing us loops to inspire us. He was very aware that we didn't have much material. When we got signed, all the songs we had went on the first EPs. So by the time we got to do A Strom In Heaven, we only had about 2 songs left. We had Slide Away and The Sun, the Sea, but the rest of it was written in the studio. John Leckie is a proper music head. He turned us on to a load of stuff we'd never heard of. He played us Dr. John, Big Star. Early on, we'd just be getting stoned and he would be turning us on to new music. That's part of being a producer. You provide inspiration. Pete Salisbury, the drummer. I always believed we'd pull it off. There was a really positive environment. John Leckie made sure of that. He had us listening to loads of different music. It didn't feel too pressurized. We did a lot of jamming. We'd play all night and then pick through it and take things out that we were interested in, working on. We were writing all the time. Sometimes a jam would turn into a song. It's amazing to be able to do that. John Leckie states, When we started, there were no demos. We were working off a collection of ideas and riffs. You couldn't really mix and match them. They all went different places. There were no songs. Even when we were recording, there'd still be improvising. Richard Ashcroft was coming up with different lyrics on every take. If there was a change in the music, like they were going into a chorus or something, they wouldn't all change together. The bass would change, then Nick would change, then Pete would do the drum fill, and they were all tumbling over each other. Trying to be a professional producer, I'd stop them and say, you've got to have a cue as to where the chorus is going to happen. I'd be trying to tighten it up, I don't think that it was because they couldn't do that, but I always felt like I failed because I shouldn't have tampered with that. I have let the flow go. There were a few moments on the record where I did. Nick McCabe states, my girlfriend was pregnant, so I had a lot of background stuff going on. But in general, it was good fun. Evenings were where it all happened. Richard and Si were off their tits, stoned the whole time, laughing. It was funny. And John Leckie, they were like a comedy troupe, those three. It was magical in parts. I think something of us as a band got lost after that. There was a feeling that what we were doing was the most amazing thing in the world. It was snowing while we were recording Beautiful Mind. I was walking in the forest and the doors to the studio were open and I could hear Beautiful Mind coming out. It illuminated the entire creek and the forest surrounding it. It was amazing. For the next 10 years after that, that sensation was missing from the music for me. That was the last time we made that kind of landscape for the imagination to run about in. It was a turning point for the band. We'd started investigating the ambient side of what we were doing, but we were also destroying it at the same time with this brutal rock thing. It made for an interesting record, the tension between those two sides of what we were about. Simon Jones states, it was pretty much improvised. It was pretty bold on our part to actually blag that and not tell the record company that we didn't have enough material to make a record. We had the ability, but we didn't have the material. That really put the pressure on making that record, but we didn't want to put the singles on the album. We had to be focused because failure was not an option. We had to work hard for it. We could have crumbled under the pressure. John would be like, come on, you've got to write a song today. He would sit in with us and record everything on DAT, digital audio tape. All the sessions, every idea we had, it all got recorded. He'd play sections back to us over and over to see if there was anything there we'd missed. Pete states, me and Si did loads of canoeing. The bass and drums would always get recorded first, so whilst Nick was getting his guitar sounds and working stuff out, or Richard was recording his vocals or writing lyrics, we were out on the canoes, going up and down the creek, having the most amazing time. We'd go up and down the river and find all these little villages. Once we came back in the middle of a storm, they said we could only take the canoes out if we could do an Eskimo roll. We were like, oh, we can do one of them. Then we'd set off. We didn't have a clue what we were doing. We were just kids from Wigan. Simon Jones states, I can remember some days we'd have been in the studio all morning and we wouldn't have found an idea or anything worth working on. It was really frustrating and stressful. But the beautiful thing about Sawmills is its location. It's in this beautiful creek, so we'd go canoeing in the afternoon just to have a break from that intensity. Or we'd go and visit the beautiful beaches in the vicinity, or head to a quaint Cornish town to wander around the cobbled streets. But we'd be straight on it again that evening or the next day. We weren't slackers. We took an ounce of black hash down with us, but we weren't big drinkers, and by that time we'd stopped taking acid and recording. The doors of perception were very much open for us by then. I don't think we could have achieved what we did if we'd been on acid. There was no room for casualties. I think it was the time we most gelled as personalities, as people. It was fraught at times, but we were a gang, all for one for all. John Leckie states, it wasn't an easy record to make. It wasn't plain sailing, happy every day kind of thing. We all knew that we wanted to make it great. There was a job to do and some sort of time limit. And it was their first record, so everyone was into it. Nick's girlfriend was expecting a baby, so he was going through a period of uncertainty. Sometimes he'd storm out, throw his guitar down and go and sulk somewhere. Then Richard Ashcroft or Simon Jones would go and talk to him. It was hard to capture Nick's special guitar sound, really. It wasn't easy, and it could be frustrating for Nick,
but for me as well. Nick McCabe states, I used to fight with John over guitar sounds. He had a Filofax with loads of Mesa Boogie amp settings written down in it. I had a Mesa Boogie Mark III. It's a weird amp and I was struggling to get the sound I wanted out of it. So John would come in with his Filofax and tweak my amp. But it wasn't what I was going for, so we had this weird little political to-ing and fro-ing over who set my amp. It was the same with mic techniques. I'd keep falling foul of people sticking an SM57 mic in front of my amp, which is one of the worst sounds in the world for what I wanted to do. But I didn't have the means of articulating exactly what it was I wanted. I didn't have the right language at my disposal, so it was an eternal compromise. I'd come into the control room and hear this big shiny production guitar sound, and that wasn't what it was supposed to be about. It was about the tape echo and the reverb. Studio culture was still stuck in the aesthetics of 80s recording techniques. People were still looking to Trevor Horn for that highly polished separation thing. Trevor Horn's a fucking genius, but it's not appropriate for most styles of music. I was quite compliant and deferential though, but that meant I couldn't really act on my instincts. I didn't have the strength of character to assert myself. It was the era of the super producer. I was enthralled to John, so although I had very specific things I wanted to try, I didn't want to argue with him. I had a right to do that, but if you're paying someone 40 grand or whatever, you listen to what he's got to say. Pete Salisbury states, Nick got some amazing sounds out of his guitars. We put the amps in the pool room. It was about 100 yards from the studio, this little shed with a pool table in it. We'd run all the cables up to there and put the amps in there and mic them up and run it back to the studio. They sounded incredible once we got that going, but Nick was always searching for something else. He always wanted that little bit more. For Nick McCabe, being in a studio like that, there were so many possibilities. There was so much for him to explore, and he was working with top engineers. So he was always chasing for that little bit more. That's what made him so great. John Leckie states, we got the kick horns in. I suggested it to the band as they were really into it. They put horns on lots of tracks. It wasn't really intentional that it was on so many songs, but everyone loved it. I think we maybe overdid the horns a bit. Some of it was in spaces that I expected Nick to fill. I really wanted more of Nick, whether it was guitars or keyboards. But the kick horns were really great. You ask for a sax solo and you get something special. Simon Jones states, I think that was just a confidence thing for Nick. He was ahead of the curve when it came to musicianship, but he was always putting himself down. He could be a bit insular, but he was a proper geek when it comes to gear and tech. We'd be telling him something he'd done was the best thing we'd ever heard, and he'd think we were taking the piss. It wasn't so much that he was self-critical, it was more that he couldn't take praise well. You would say something complimentary, and it would end up being a point of conflict. So even though the brass wasn't necessarily Nick's suggestion, he was happy to go along with it. We all were. We were listening to a lot of Stooges at the time, so having all that squalling brass on the record seemed quite natural. Funhouse, the second Stooges album, had got all these mad insane horns all over it. We'd go out driving in the van and listen to the monitor mixes on cassette, driving around Cornwall. I can remember listening to The Sun, the Sea, after the kick horns had been down, having it on full blast, all distorted and thinking how amazing it sounded. All of us were really, really pleased. It exceeded our expectations. Those extra textures we'd heard on other people's records, to have them on ours was a dream fulfilled. We didn't feel like it was to cover up for an absence of Nick's guitars. It was the vibe we wanted. John Leckie states, Richard Ashcroft was the only one singing. No one else in the band could do backing vocals. You could get the gospel choir in, I suppose, but Richard wasn't into that. He'd always leave lots of space. Plus, he'd never sing the same thing twice. Every take, there would be different lyrics. It was hard to know which take to use sometimes. It was all stream of consciousness. They would drop down from heaven. Simon Jones states, the pressure was really on Richard. Not only did we not have any songs, but he didn't have any lyrics written. You can't work out what he's saying on some of the songs because we buried them. He had a pen and paper in his hand for the whole last couple of weeks, just writing as he went along. But because we were a jamming band, Richard had got really good at making up lyrics and melodies off the cuff. It's an art in itself. He was quite happy to sing nonsense over the top of stuff just to get a melody line or a hook. He'd assemble his parts as the song was playing. It didn't always work out, but he was never afraid to do that. Miles Leonard, A&R for Hut, says, the Smashing Pumpkins, who were on Hut as well, had come over from America, and we all went down to see them at the Underworld in Camden. All of the band loved Gish because there was these moments of big brash harshness, and then they'll suddenly drop into this subtlety. Billy Corgan's voice was just a whisper. Then they would be up and off again. Those high-impact, dynamic songs were a real influence. Verve went back to record a session for John Peel, and they needed another song, and they came up with Already There. The way it crashes in and out was directly influenced by the Pumpkins. John Leckie. I've always felt a little bit disappointed that I never captured the sound of their live performance. I wanted to do that, but one of the briefs we got was to try and make the song shorter. The record company wanted radio play singles. Sometimes live, they'll play just 3 songs in the gig. The songs would go on for half an hour. In rehearsals, they wouldn't stop playing. They'll settle down and tune up, and then start a song, and it would go on and on and on. They'd go off to all these places, musically, and I felt like it was my job to pull them back. I was trying to establish a structure, but it was all free form. I'd be saying, look, we need a chorus. Simon Jones says, I understand why John might have been disappointed. There was a little bit of that feeling from us too, but I think the crux of it is that the stuff he'd seen us play live was really well rehearsed. Our set was then basically all the singles and B-sides. So these songs that we were improvising and writing in the studio, we didn't get to play at the peak of our powers. It was only after the record was completed that we learned how to play those songs live as a band. So it's not our fault. It's not his fault. We just weren't in a position to make the kind of record that he wanted us to make. Nick McCabe states, the band that Virgin signed, we ditched early on. The early demos were like Rolling Stones power pop tunes. They bore no relation to what ended up on A Strom In Heaven. We'd moved on already. We'd already failed to capture that early sound of the band with Gravity Grave. It was this sprawling live animal, but it failed to translate in the studio, so we had to take it in another direction to make it work at all. So by the time we came to do A Strom In Heaven, we knew it was impossible to capture the kind of bands we were live in the studio, so we had to try and write stuff that translated. I didn't have the technical know-how to achieve what I wanted. John Leckie states, the only real single we turned up was Blue, which was a song that we made up in the studio. It came from one of those backwards experiments I used to do with the Stone Roses. We played the tape backwards for fun and created another song from it. The backwards stuff wasn't dubbed on at the end. It actually created the song. A bit like Don't Stop on the Stone Roses debut album. Don't Stop was a backwards version of Waterfall. Simon Jones states, 6 a.m. on the last morning, Richard was doing the vocals for Blue. Dave Boyd was turning up the next day, expecting to collect the masters to take back to Virgin. We really were flying by the seats of our pants. Blue came further down the line during the recording, and it felt like most concise song on that record. It felt like a single, and it was a single. It was the band starting to shape their music into something that was more like a traditional song. It was a hint that they understood what made a great pop song, and was an indicator to where they were going next. Simon Jones says, "There weren't many outtakes because every idea we had to fully realise into a song. There were a couple, Shoeshine Girl and South Pacific. I'm still surprised that they didn't make it on the record. They're really good, but they're the only 2 tracks that didn't make it. Shoeshine Girl is based on a drum loop that John provided. Nick played mandolin, and we sat around and tried to make a song out of it." John Leckie states, "It was even mixed at Sawmills. We got so settled in there, nobody really wanted to go home. I phoned up Dave Boyd from Hut and said, 'The studio's still available, so we're going to stay here and we're going to mix it. And on March 10th, you'll have the finished album.' He freaked out a bit, but that's what we did. Then it was released in June. Not bad going. If someone else had mixed it, it wouldn't have sounded the same. What you hear is what we all heard at the time. What we all got off on is what's on the record. No one tampered with it. It was great that the record company supported that." Miles Leonard, A&R of Hut, states, "There was a real sense of excitement when we heard the finished record. They had far more critical acclaim than actual hits. People loved them for who they were. The whole Mad Richard thing. You could argue that on that first album, there still weren't any crossover songs or hits. They didn't have a fool's gold, but they had a sound and occupied a space that was vitally important. They were a band true to who they were. It was a big first statement. Back then, I didn't have to look at budgets and forecasts. For me, it was just a question of, did they make the best record they could have made at that time? And the answer was yes. But after all that critical acclaim for the EPs, I think some journalists, and maybe even fans, felt that they hadn't delivered on what they promised." Simon Jones states, "When it was done, the feeling was all really positive. As a band, we were happy. We'd made something we could be proud of, especially considering how young we were. We'd had arguments with the record company over the second and third EPs, but when we delivered the album, they seemed pretty happy with it because they thought there were singles on it. We'd taken on board what they'd wanted, and without compromising too much, had delivered something a bit more concise and focused. The Americans, especially, were delighted. We picked up on a big following on college radio and did a tour across the whole country. We had a big underground following, and Slide Away was being played on MTV all the time. In the climate that existed then, it worked." Miles Leonard states, "We did a photo shoot for the album up in Billinge, in one of the back garden of a mate of the band. Brian Cannon was the art director for Microdot. Michael Spencer Jones was going to take the shot. A lot of those really classic psychedelic albums would have pictures on the inner sleeve that had so much detail, and you'll spend ages looking at what was going on. Brian had that in mind, so he wanted to try and do something really daft. They invited all their friends along to be in it. They brought in this old Citroen that they were going to set on fire, and we were going to have Richard and Si playing chess right next to it, and they'll be surrounded by people doing loads of other things to make this mad, weird montage. But Brian Cannon was very rough and ready in his approach. Health and safety were 2 words that weren't in his vocabulary. He just wanted to get the best shot. He poured gallons of petrol all over the car, and Michael had his tripod set up in the corner. I was up a ladder on the side of the house. The band's tour DJ, Wayne Griggs, was sitting in this horse and cart. Everyone was in their position, and Dave Hallowell went up to the car and threw this match in and was engulfed in a ball of flames. Dave was running away on fire, with Brian yelling, "Take the shot!" Dave's arm was on fire and it frightened the life out of everyone. Si and Richie were really close to the car, but it was just about getting that shot. There was one opportunity. Once that car was burnt, it was burnt. There wasn't a fire extinguisher in sight. It does everything, that picture. It's amazing. It captures everything about the band at that time. Their attitude, their spirit, perfectly. Simon Jones states, I look at the clips on YouTube from that time, and we're all just boys. The first time we went over to New York, everyone else got into this bar, but they wouldn't let me in. I was the baby face of the band, but the legal age was 21. We were still teenagers. Everyone had come out because of me. It was embarrassing. Every time we'd appear on TV with other bands, I always felt like we were children. I felt intimidated doing the first interviews with the NME. Coming from Wigan, we felt so uneducated and unaware, wide-eyed and ignorant. They expect you to know what you're all about and articulate how you feel about everything. We'd read NME religiously, and to suddenly be interviewed by journalists whose name you'd been reading at the bottom of articles about your favourite bands, The Smiths, The Cure, New Order. That's why Richard was so good. He wanted to be a pop star. He wanted to bring the glamour and the swagger back. He had a mission statement ready. We're the greatest. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to be this. It made me think, shit, I've got a lot to live up to. But it really spurred you on. It was inspiring. Nick McCabe rounds this interview up by saying, around the time we were recording Urban Hymns, Brian Cannon played A Storm in Heaven, and I thought he was taking the piss. It sounded like nonsense to me. The thing that you did last is the thing that you hate the most. The thing you're doing next is the best thing you've ever done. Until that's the last thing you've done, and then you hate that as well. It's like growing up. Kids don't want to associate with last year's toys because they're babyish now. It's that trajectory from boy to man. Your records serve as an embarrassment to how naive you were. It's only as an old chap you can look back at them and feel like that naivety was actually a great thing. That's a lesson you can't tell someone in their 20s. And those interviews were conducted by John Clay. So thank you very much for that information, John Clay.